Welcome to Wildlife Rehabilitation from Rescue to Release, a podcast dedicated to licensed wildlife rehabilitators and the veterinarians who support them. I'm your host, Gail Buell. Techniques we discuss here are meant for licensed wildlife professionals. If you aren't licensed and trained for wildlife rehabilitation, do not attempt to capture, hold, or rehabilitate any wild animal. If you find an injured wild animal, a wildlife professional can recommend next steps. We will tackle topics about rescue, care, management, reconditioning, and releasing wildlife found in North America. This is a deep dive into each subject. We hope to give rehabilitators information they can use because they're already going to great lengths to rescue and nurse animals back to health. There are three possible outcomes in wildlife rehabilitation: release, euthanasia, and placement. An injured or orphaned wild animal's journey to restored health and independence in their natural habitat is delicate and complex. We draw techniques and expertise from many disciplines. Many animals brought into rehabilitation cannot be saved. The last gift we can give them is humane euthanasia. We'll talk more about when this is necessary. Sometimes animals are deemed non-releasable and evaluated to be suitable for a life in captivity. When that happens, we shift to a long-term approach to managing their care, training, and housing. Some such animals serve as ambassador animals, a term for animals that rehabilitators use to educate the public. Each episode, we'll speak with experts who represent specialty topics across the profession of wildlife rehabilitation, ambassador animal care and management, showcasing best practices. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This episode is less about animals and more about people. Today, I am so happy to welcome my good friend Amanda Nicholson back to the podcast. Amanda is Senior Vice President of the Wildlife Center of Virginia. Now, in Season 2, Episode 13, she joined me to talk about social media for wildlife rehabilitators. Lots of great tips there, so be sure to catch that episode. In this episode, we cover having crucial conversations, a skill that is so useful in our field. So let's jump right into it. Amanda, thank you for coming on. And before we get into the topic of crucial conversations, I thought I wanted to ask you, and I know a little bit about this, but I think everybody would be interested in what your origin story is. How did you get to where you are at the Wildlife Center of Virginia?
Well, thank you for having me, Gail. I'm very excited to be here again. I feel so cool as a return visitor, and I'm especially excited for this topic today. And I think my origin story kind of plays into this topic well, of why I really like this topic and try and learn more about it. But I am at the Wildlife Center of Virginia. I am the Senior Vice President. And I was hired here fresh out of college and walked into, I think 3 days after I graduated, I found out I got the job.
Wow.
And I
Amazing.
walked right into a job as a 3-day-a-week rehabilitator and a 2-day-a-week front desk coordinator. So they were smushing two facets of the job together to make a full-time job, which was appealing for a new college grad. And I've been here ever since. So it's been more than 2 decades. And my role at the center has really changed a lot. I moved, I did all rehabilitation at one point. I did all rehabilitation and a little bit of outreach. And then I did a lot of outreach and a little bit of rehab and then total outreach. And then from there moved into more of an upper management senior level position.
Well, what is your title currently?
Current title is Senior Vice President.
Senior Vice President. And
So,
she still
who would've
talks
thought?
to me. I love it. With that title, that's amazing.
That's because in my head, like I've only worked here a few years, right? What is time?
What is time? Time has no meaning anymore. I swear it really doesn't. But oh my gosh, I mean, you've got especially at the Wildlife Center of Virginia, but you haven't just been involved with the Wildlife Center. I mean, you have been involved with the national organization
so NWRA, and that's where you and I got to know each other more
Yeah.
than anything was at NWRA. Do you want to tell everybody just a teeny tiny bit how you got involved with NWRA?
Sure. I think I was so fortunate being here at the Wildlife Center and having this place really value that continuing education and
Mm-hmm.
always learning. So I was a pretty young rehabilitator when I had the opportunity to go to my first NWRA
Mm-hmm.
symposium in Orlando, of all places, which was super fun.
Oh yeah.
Uh, so um, got to go, got to attend some amazing classes, got to have fun by the pool as well that year because Orlando. Uh,
Orlando.
and yeah, and I think I didn't get to go to NWRA every year, but would go every few years and was encouraged to speak and present at NWRA. That was that's a big wildlife center thing too, to
Mm-hmm.
encourage our staff to go and contribute to the education pool as well. And yeah, it was so fun. NWRA is such a fantastic symposium. And over the years, I think I got to know more people there. And I at the Wildlife Center of Virginia, I plan our annual rehabilitation conference each fall. And I think my reputation as a conference organizer, I guess,
Oh
got
yeah.
out there.
Uh-huh.
uh,
She's amazing, by the way.
I do love an event. I love some event planning. Yeah, so NWRA recruited me to be on the volunteer program committee. And gosh, this might be my ninth or 10th year doing it now. Again, what is time?
What is time?
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, so over the years, I got to meet so many fantastic people and like you, Gail. And,
You have to say that. I'll pay you later.
and it's been great. It's enabled me to tap into a good community of people as well for our conference, but just there's so many great people to learn from there.
Oh, it really is. I do want to give a plug for Wildlife Center Virginia, and in no small part, you're responsible for some of the things that I'm about to say. But you just mentioned the Call of the Wild conference, which I think is one of the best conferences, state level conferences out there. And now you kind of do it hybrid, some online. That's what it was this year, online, and then some in person things, which I just think is so. Maybe that's the only good thing that came out of the pandemic was some of this online offerings. But beyond that, Wildlife Center Virginia not only does just phenomenal rehabilitation and phenomenal outreach, but you guys need to be on their socials to see the different things that they post, but also talking about continuing education. It is an embodiment of Wildlife Center Virginia, not only what you mentioned to have folks go to the like national conference and present and things like that, but you guys created is it Wild Care Academy or Wildlife Care Academy? I can't remember. We'll put the link in the show notes, I
Okay.
promise. But it is an amazing resource for people wanting to learn more about wildlife rehabilitation and best practices and things like that. And yeah, I just think that just shows how much Wildlife Center of Virginia is not just invested in Virginia wildlife or just the Wildlife Center of Virginia, but looking outward. And and I can't say enough about that you're one of the leaders in the country, probably the world, with that. And even this is not about continuing education, but it is about looking outward on how wildlife rehabilitation actually, we have a lot of data and we're not
Mm.
connecting that data with the people who need it. But Wildlife Center Virginia is one of very few places where there's a wildlife medical database that you can use, and it's called Wild One. We'll also put that in the show notes because, yeah, it's great. and and I in a previous episode we talked to Dr. Cara Pierce about Wild One, so you're gonna have to go back and check that out. But today, and of course, I could keep going on and on and on about Wildlife Center Virginia.
I'll pay
But
you later.
you can pay me later. But today we're going to talk about what I consider a really interesting conversation, and that's in the title, Crucial Conversations. And I certainly need a lot more of this skill for
Don't
sure.
we all?
Don't we all? Oh my gosh. Um, but when we talk about crucial conversations, Amanda, what do you mean, or what does it mean to you,
Hmm.
crucial conversations?
Yeah, so crucial conversations is, well, I should say it factors into my origin story of, remember I came in as a little baby out of college and
Hmm.
kind of grew in my position here. And at some point, I don't know, 4 or 5 years in, they made me a supervisor. I was like, oh, okay, wow, uh, that's cool. Don't really know about that in terms of
Hmm.
managing humans. And my mother actually started, who was in her previous career, was a director in a hospital setting. And
Mm.
she sent me this email newsletter and was like, oh, maybe you'll find this helpful. And it was called Crucial. I think at the time that was Crucial Conversations.
Okay.
And it's put out by Vital Smarts, is the company.
And do
So
they still do that?
yes. So they have now become crucial learning. I think that over the years, I mean, again, this was in the mid 2000s when I got this. It was Crucial Conversations, and then I think it was Crucial Skills, and their website now is Crucial Learning. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
we will.
but I think they, in terms of how I learned about this, they are the ones that coined this term, crucial conversations, which they define as any sort of high stakes conversation where there are potentially opposing opinions and a higher likelihood of emotional investment. So, and we've all had these, right? Like we probably have crucial conversations on the regular in our lives with a variety of people. So I will say now the company, they do way more than just crucial conversations. And I'm like such a weird fangirl of theirs. they they don't even know. Uh, but maybe we'll get them to listen to this podcast.
There we go. We can send it to
Be
them.
like, oh my gosh. They do a lot of different aspects of communication and leadership and productivity. I actually I love that subset of their training too, of this productive minute. They'll do these short little videos about how to be more productive, and they talk about time management too. That's so great because I love lists and managing things, but I've taken some webinars of theirs that have really helped me change the way I organize my
Ah.
time and how I spend it, and I
Mhm.
think made me a lot more productive. So they put a lot of stuff out there, but of course today we're going to talk about these, crucial conversations, kind of these high stakes conversations that we
Right,
have with people.
right. But all of those are pieces and parts of it, and I'm going to be looking them up too, because I could certainly use some more skill building in those areas for sure. So, crucial conversations. Why, and this may be self-evident to everybody but me, but why is this important in wildlife rehabilitation?
Well, I mean, I think fundamentally it's important for everyone at all times, everywhere, no matter who you are. Like if you're, it's good for people who, if you can have these crucial conversations and apply this sort of learning with your partner, with your children, with your parents, with your coworkers, whether you manage them or not,
Hmm.
people at the grocery store, whomever. Like if you are a human who ever interacts with other humans, this is useful. So unless you're a recluse who lives in a little mountain cabin and you never see humans, I think this can be good for everyone.
Okay.
And I think wildlife rehabilitation in particular, I have two thoughts on this. Number one, I think the one that we're all probably pretty well aware of is that um, wildlife rehabilitators and educators have these high stakes conversations on the regular with the public, right? We're trying to help people take care of wildlife. We're trying to educate them. And I think we all know at various points of the year, sometimes emotions run high with animal
Just a little
rescuers
bit.
and yeah, exactly, and all that.
Uh-huh.
It's the, like, please put back the fawn, it is fine. And then it turns into this, like, you don't care about animals conversation.
Right.
We all kind of dread those calls. And those high stakes when people are just really, patience is wearing thin and they're really emotionally invested in an animal. There's that eternal joke that a lot of wildlife rehabilitators get into this field because they love animals and they would rather work with animals than people. But we know that's like the number one myth, right? About our, like, the people come with the animals because the people are going to bring you animals.
Right. It's the same with like zoo. Just an aside, when I worked for the zoo too, you heard that all the time from zookeepers. Well, I wanted to work for a zoo because I wanted to just work with animals, not people. And it's like, well, we are all interacting with the visitors, so almost any of those professions that deal with animals, and you're like, I just want animals.
Exactly.
They have a big human component. So,
and of course, our field too is, with the Wildlife Center of Virginia is a hospital for wildlife. So we get in a lot of pretty bad cases. Like we do a lot of humane euthanasia because that is a wonderful gift that we have and a viable treatment option. But man, talk about a high stakes emotional topic when communicating with the public. So I think definitely those of us as rehabilitators and educators can use a lot of these tools in our interactions with the public.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier too that talking to any human, but especially on the topic of euthanasia, I mean, even internal conversations, I think this lends itself to that, especially when you're talking about euthanasia.
For sure. And then, of course, the other thing that I have seen, because I've seen it firsthand, is that this is a generalization, but in this field, I don't think we always necessarily have a lot of leadership training. I see more and more becoming readily available. Again, NWRA is a good example of that.
Right.
But I don't know that I have always seen that in my couple of decades being in this. And I think it's a pretty common phenomenon to promote your good people and to elevate them to a supervisory position, right? I think that's what happened to me. I was a good, solid worker. I was a good rehabilitator. I took care of things. I got things done. And then when I had been here a few years, they promoted me to be a supervisor position. Now, again, the Wildlife Center bought into my growth and development, and they did send me to some sort of leadership training early on. But I don't know that that's always the case, where I think sometimes you have to, find something that works for you and make sure you, the new manager, are carving out time for that. But I see it regularly. I mean, I'm doing it with a colleague of mine too, of like growing him to be in a supervisory position because he's a really good worker. Now I'm trying to make sure, he can build skills too. But I think, suddenly you are responsible for other people and other people's performance and maybe don't always have the tools for that. So I think, that's not just our field. I think that's a pretty common phenomenon. So I think a lot of us grow up through our positions and kind of learn on the job. So I think these sorts of skills and teachings and all of that can be really useful in those situations too. Although you don't have to be a leader, you don't have to be a supervisor or a manager,
They'd
by
help
that
you
classic.
at any level, right?
Exactly. Because we're all leaders to some degree, right? You don't have to be like in the,
Right. Yeah. And as you were talking, I'm like, that happened to me many times.
Yeah, right.
I kind of stumble along trying to take classes or glean things from other people or other things on how to be a better, supervisor / manager, that kind of thing. And yeah, have some of those difficult conversations, and do them in a way that ends up being productive for everybody involved. So kind of that win-win. Oh my gosh. Okay. So I can relate to all this so far.
Well, great.
This is great. This is great. So I think, we've gotten also the idea, I mean, you are very much engaged over this topic of crucial conversations. Is there any particular reasons why you're like, this is interesting to you?
Yes. And I think it will be interesting to you for the same exact reasons. Because
I'm intrigued.
this is all communications, right?
Mhm.
So it's all about through crucial learning, crucial conversations, and all that. It's about human interactions, but it boils down to it's all about behavior, and our behavior is shaped by our influences, which involves communication. So I guess first of all, the crucial learning webinars that are out there, and they have a lot of free stuff, by the way. But when they teach their courses on these different topics, they take a lot of examples. They have a lot of social science examples, and they're really good storytellers. So they have a lot of just like really relatable things where they do behavioral studies on people. Sometimes they involve kids. They had a whole thing about, they were talking about honesty and like at what point are we afraid of being honest, or at what point do we start to equate being honest with like hurting people's feelings, which is not like, that's not the definition of being honest, is not being rude or hurting other people's feelings, but at some point we have this fear that's built into it. And they did a whole experiment with like kids and brownies and had somebody make these brownies, but they screwed them up and they used like salt instead of sugar. But the person was like, oh, this is my beloved great grandmother's recipe and it's so precious to me. And do you eat them? And like in this experiment, even these kids were like, yum, but it was terrible. But
sure.
they were so afraid of hurting feelings. Or, there's social experiments about like cutting in line at movie theaters or giving people negative reviews, or it's just all these nice little relatable examples that they build into this. So I think it's naturally very interesting because it's all about human behavior, right? Which is pretty interesting and confusing and complicated and all of that, because humans, it's hard being a human often.
It really is.
It really is. But I think over the years, with the more of these trainings that I've taken and the more animal training webinars I've taken, the more I'm like, these are just exactly the same. Like I cannot even tell you the number of times that I will be listening to a crucial learning webinar and they're talking about, different skills to put into play. And I'm like, that's exactly like animal training. Or vice versa. And I just think there's so many similarities between those things because humans are animals too, right? So we're just learning like how to break it down, how to set the stage, arrange your antecedent and all that. It's whether you're training a kestrel or a new hire person, like there are a lot of similarities there. And I get these newsletters from a variety of places. And so I think like just the other week, I got one with the subject line of like, when is coercion acceptable? And I was like, just looking at the headline, I don't know if this is from Crucial Learning about human management or if it's like an animal training one, because same thing. So
right. Wow. Yeah, you're right. I would be very interested in this. It's training. It's animal training. So yeah, I totally can relate. Completely can relate. Okay, so let's get into it. Crucial conversations.
Let's have one. What's it? No.
Oh no. Oh no.
Gail, I have something to tell you. No.
Oh my gosh. And the way she just said that just made me sit back in my chair.
Right? See, I didn't plan to do that, but we can totally know.
Okay, so why don't we, have in some examples?
Yes. So I think, again, just going to sound like a fangirl for Crucial Learning. Maybe Justin Hale, he's one of the trainers who I see a lot on these webinars. Maybe he'll listen to this and I'll be real excited. But
I'll send you a link. You can just kind of send it over.
Or maybe they'll be like, she needs to listen to this more. Because I have to say, this is an interest of mine. I listen to these things all the time and read newsletters and stuff, but by no means am I an expert at all. I am still a human who sometimes has a real hard time being a human and has to, figure out how to apply this stuff. So,
well, I feel like we're on a continuum, right? We're always learning and we should always want to learn. And you're farther along on the continuum on this subject than I would bet pretty much everybody who's listening to this. And I know you fairly well. And I also know that just like me, you want to reach back and help people along that continuum, along that path. So you don't have to be the expert. And certainly, we're going to, all the source material, what you're talking about will be in the show notes and things like that, so people can look up more information. But I think this is just one of those things that we can just really just always strive to improve a little bit at a time.
Yeah.
It's that training thing. It's that arranging that antecedent and behavior and things like that. And we can do that for ourselves.
Yes, for sure.
Which is really cool. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but I meant to interrupt.
Yeah. So in the crucial learning things, I think one of the other things I like about it is they have these really relatable little like chapters of study. So they'll focus on different things at different points. So they have these little catchy slogans. So when they're like, if you're managing a crucial conversation, you should get unstuck. And then there's like ways that they tell you to get unstuck. They have like master my stories and start with heart and state my path. So all of those sound like not much of anything right now, but like in the course, I think you learn more about that. So then as you're kind of struggling with something or thinking through, you're like, I should, master my stories or whatever. So for example, I think two that really stand out to me all the time, or at least that I personally catch myself on, and then sometimes see other people struggling too, is that master my stories. So this is such a classic thing that we all do, of when something happens that we don't like or we're offended by or something, we often tell ourselves a story about that, right? So I think the most classic office example is like someone is perpetually late to meetings. They just can't get to meetings on time. They're always late. And I think it's like a gut reaction from a lot of us to say like, well, I guess they don't care. I guess they don't respect my time at all. They don't like me. Right?
Oh, sure. You go right down that path, don't you?
Right
so
down
fast.
Yes. So, and I think in our field, again, I mentioned earlier, that we euthanize an animal. We say, oh, thank you so much for bringing in that great horned owl with its wing falling off. Our vets looked at it and determined that its wing was falling off and was, very deeply debilitated and could never be saved, yada, yada, yada. And we elected to humanly euthanize this bird because it would never recover from that injury. And sometimes a lot of people are really lovely and supportive, but we do get those reactions of like, 2 out of every 10 times maybe, of like, well, you guys don't care about animals. Like, what?
That or the other reaction is, well, I never would have brought it to you if I thought you were going to euthanize it. I'm like, what are we going to do then? Super glue it? Just, I'm like, no, that's a really good one. Really good
and
reaction.
I feel the number of times that our poor front desk team has been told like, well, you guys don't like animals, or you just don't care, or you just don't care about this animal, or I guess it's more important to save bald eagles rather than blue jays. Like there's a lot of stories happening there, and of course it's all coming from this emotional place where people are really invested and feel insulted by this. So I think that master my stories line is really all about catching yourself doing it, of like, man, I am telling myself a story here, and to stop and ask yourself what's really going on here. And in the case of like a person chronically being late to a meeting, of like, maybe they aren't a good timekeeper, or maybe they have to drop their kid off at daycare all the time, or in any of these situations, maybe this person is lacking resources or understanding, or has something else going on entirely. And I think the point is you don't know what's going on because you're not actually that person. So don't sub in your own story for it, right? It's just half the battle is like catching yourself and like, okay, what's really going on here in this situation?
Boy, that's a really good one, because as you were talking about that and mastering your own story, when you first said mastering your own story, my first thought was that humans are about stories, period. what'd you do today? How was your day at work, honey? And then you get the story.
Yeah.
And, the person who finds the injured animal and all that stuff and brings it to you, whatever, now has a story about that whole experience. But then as you were talking, I'm like, oh my gosh, not only do we create stories like that, like what happened to me today, or, oh my gosh, you'll never guess who I met or whatever. And that's a story, but that we put our stories on others.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm almost speechless. I'm never speechless, but almost speechless. Going, that to me is pretty eye-opening.
It is, and it sounds so simple too, right?
Uh-huh.
And this is what I love. Like I'm not a certified trainer. I'm not gonna get into all of the details. I'm just gonna give you a couple of like little tiny things that I
Sure,
find
sure.
helpful and catch myself in. But yeah, like we do that so often. So half the battle is like catching yourself in it.
Mhm.
And the other thing that, again, I'll also make it about animal training, right? Is the interesting thing to me is when we're doing these stories, we use a lot of labels. And what are we not supposed to use when we're training animals, Gail?
Labels.
Labels.
Don't use the
We're supposed
labels.
to describe the behavior, not
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
label, or. And so think about that like, oh, I get this person's always late to meetings. I guess they don't care. They're just lazy.
There
And
you go. And as
like,
soon as that happens,
boom. Yeah.
everything stops. You stop thinking about why they might be late
Yes.
or how to find out because you've already decided
They're lazy.
they're lazy. So you
Yeah.
don't have to think any farther.
Yeah.
And wow. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we talk about this all the time with animal training in terms of like, oh, my peregrine falcon didn't station at her designated, like didn't target to her station this morning. Um, it would be easy to walk away and be like, God, this bird is so freaking stubborn,
Stubborn.
which is like, I mean, that's not doing anybody any good of like,
Mhm.
how do we overcome that? So like that's a label. What was the
Right.
behavior? What was the antecedent? What were all of the factors that played into
Right.
that?
Right.
So yeah, so that to me is master my stories and catching yourself and all of that. So that's one of my two favorite official crucial learning components, I would say.
Well, can't wait
And
to hear the other one because that one was really good.
so the other one, I I should have triple checked this. I think it's the state my path. I think that's their slogan for it. But to me, it's like state my path. It's basically creating safety and declaring your good intentions. So you're clarifying, I guess, what you're saying because that's what it is. It's when you're having a crucial conversation, you want to state what you do mean, and then also state what you don't mean. And it may
Oh.
sound intensely basic, but I think this is like this factors into like how other people build their stories too, right? I think it's so clear to us coming into this of like I think I failed to think through a really good example on this, so now I'm going to lose my train of thought entirely. Uh,
You know what? It's okay because it will come back to you. It
I
will come
think
back to
it's
you.
yeah, it's just like I'm saying, like, hey, Gail, I wanted to tell you this thing about this thing. Here's what I'm saying. Um, I'm not saying that you are being lazy or not caring. I mean, that's a little bit of a
Right.
harsh example, but I see this in practice a lot. I think once you're aware of it, you start noticing other people doing it. Right? I've watched a lot of email miscommunications being in this office environment and like see an
Hmm.
email go out to a bunch of us, and then I've heard some people react to it where it's like, well, God, he must think I'm dumb if he didn't think I knew how to do that or that I was gonna do
Uh,
that.
uh,
And I think that state my path is like declaring what you mean and then declaring what you're not saying. And it tends to make it safer for other people. It makes it harder for them to invent their own story about what your intentions are because you're just really clearly saying what your intentions are.
so this you just said it not only is in verbal conversation or verbal communication, it's also in email communication or written communication too.
Yeah.
So and I had a question about that. I really like it. I've always known to try to really state, what you're trying to say, but not so much the other half of that.
Yeah.
About saying what you're not, you don't mean X, Y, or Z. You mean this. Is part of that, and maybe it's not part of it at all. It is part of it somewhere, but maybe not this a particular thing, is to ask the person. So, hey, Amanda, this is what I I'm talking to you about this. I talked to you about that, and hey, can you reflect back to me what you think I said?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, having that sort of clarification can be
Mhm.
really good. I think it's like that. Again, humans are complicated beings, right? I think we have this tendency to have these like hidden meanings sometimes, and we rely on our humor, and sometimes our humor is like a little bit mean. We make these little jabs to like make a point because it's kind of funny, and we're afraid to say maybe what we directly mean or whatever. So I think it's easy for people to take things the wrong way, or to try and get like caught up in their own heads about trying to create some sort of hidden meaning by your
Mhm.
words. So I
Mhm.
think, to a certain extent, it's being direct. You're not doing it with any sort of overtone of emotion or anything like that. You're
Right.
relying on facts.
Mhm.
Um, but I think, yeah, just that continual clarification can work well. And I'm trying to think through some. I'll go ahead and stick my neck out there and do a real life example of a
Okay.
crucial conversation I had years ago of talking about education bird use,
Mhm.
of wanting to move entirely toward this, giving animals. I'll sub in bird as well too, because I tend to work more with the birds here
Birds,
than
yeah.
the opossums as well. But moving more towards, giving birds choice and control,
Mhm.
using a lot of operant conditioning with an emphasis on positive reinforcement, and allowing them to, participate in programs. So
Mhm.
that was kind of my platform I was running on, of like, this is important to me. I want to move, I want to do to this model. And that means
Right.
that we're going to have to sometimes take no for an answer. What I'm not saying is that birds can just do whatever they want all the time, and it's not important to use these birds for programs anymore. I am not saying that I just want to have a collection of display birds. What I am saying, I want all of our birds to always choose to participate with us. I want our education birds to be working birds. I just want them to have the option to say no, and we respect that. But
Mhm.
that does
Mhm.
not look like, oh, well, never mind, they're just a bunch of birds out there in enclosures and we'll never take them off site again, sort of thing. So,
That's a really good example, actually. That's a really good example, partly because I do a lot of work in the ambassador animal training world and mentoring people, and that's also a very common. You said you had that years ago, but it's very common.
yeah,
Is like, well, then they'll always say no, so they're saying their own story in their head. But oh, I love that example because it's like, no, that's not what we're saying, that they're not going to participate, but we want to move to a model so that we can respect the no.
yeah,
Yeah. Oh, I love it. That was a good example, at least for
good.
me. I don't know about anybody else, but for me,
Well,
it was great. Really made it
hopefully
clear.
it's applicable. Yes.
It's applicable. I think it's applicable. So, um, any other little nuggets like that you've been able to? I'm like, we're just going to keep you on here
Okay.
forever because
We'll
I'm
keep
like,
going
wait, I need
forever.
more. I need more.
So those are my kind of two official, favorite areas, I think, that I think about a lot and try and catch myself on, and always try and do better. Um, I'll give you an Amanda nugget on this, and this is not from Crucial Learning. This is from Amanda Nicholson's brain. Uh, I think there is some combination of these things. We get caught up in telling our stories, and guessing other people's stories, and wondering if there's a hidden meaning, and like, what are they really trying to say, and all this sort of things. So my slogan for that
Mhm.
is, I see people again and again in all of these situations where they take their own head and put it right up their own butt. And I don't know if I can say on your podcast, Gail, but I just did.
We may have to talk to the producer, Kirk. Well, that was great.
You can bleep me out and sub in cloaca if you would like.
There we go. Cloaca or vent.
Cloaca.
Okay.
But man, that is my own observation of like, and what I mean is, people are they're not pausing to think about the situation out from outside of their own perspective. Everyone puts their head up their own cloaca.
There you go.
They're just so entirely absorbed in their own stories. Mm-hmm. And they're forgetting to like step outside of themselves, look at the facts, not the stories, the facts, mm-hmm. and just try and like remove themselves from the messy human that they are and try and like, okay, what's really going on here? Maybe there are other factors at play. What's the antecedent, right? What are all mm-hmm. the factors that we have going on here? And I see it time and time again. And I mean, I do it myself too. I think my only benefit now from doing these different webinars is that a lot of times I can catch myself doing it. And I'm like, well, Amanda, your head is right up here. So I try and, then step outside of it and all that. But I see it all the time. And sometimes it really surprises me. Sometimes I see people in like pretty significant positions of power do it. And it's so interesting of, a situation happens and the person's like, man, gosh, is that person mad at me for something? Right? We all right. kind of turn into like girls in 6th grade, I guess.
Don't wait.
Oh my God, are they mad at me for that? But the number of times that I have heard that from people are like, well, that person must be really furious with me because blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, I know more than you about this situation. Like sometimes I'm privy to more information. I'm like, that's not even remotely true. But you really, kind of got caught up in your own angst and concern and worry. So,
right. Well, and just on the other side, for all of us caught up in our own angst and worry and stuff. I mean, we're with our inside of our head pretty much 24/7, right? So you can see where it happens, where it's easier to just stay with our own perspective. And that person's lazy, or that person's mad at me, or whatever. And again, those are labels. But so then what is a strategy? You're a supervisor. You have a regular meeting that several people attend. Someone is routinely not coming in on time, whether they let you know or not, whatever. How do you, as that person's supervisor, then kind of, at least in general, how would you structure having a crucial conversation with that person?
Yeah, so there is, the structure is so simple in many regards. I think sometimes we get so caught up in like, what am I going to say? I have to say so much. I have to say a whole thing and like, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. One big key is to allow them space to talk. So like you need to get it going, and you need to make it safe, right? You can't do what I did of like, Gail, I have something to talk to you about.
I mean, immediately, like, oh my gosh, like, I'm in trouble.
Not safe. So, creating safety first of like, hey, can I talk to you? Now, I still worry about this one as a manager too, because I see people react to that as well, even in the safest way of like, hey, do you have 5 minutes to chat today?
That is so loaded, isn't it?
It's so loaded. Yeah.
Can I just talk to you for a minute? Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I don't know how to get around that either.
I know. We're messy humans. I think you want to make it as safe as you possibly can. But then when you're chatting with them, it's, like, I'd like to talk to you about this issue being, late. I have observed this, and you want to stick your fact in there, and it's a fact, not a story. So it's not like, here's what I've seen. You not caring about when our meetings start, right? That's a story. Here's what I've seen the past 3 times that we've had our communications meetings. You have been 10 to 15 minutes late. So just pure, simple facts, not any labels and all that sort of stuff. And then ask them a question to like, what's your impression, or why, or can you tell me more about this? And just let them talk.
Right.
And to me, it's like, oh my gosh, I don't know why that is. It's so intensely simple, but I think we feel like, I don't know, we have to have all of the answers, but like they are a part of this conversation too. And
Mhm.
ideally, they're going to then say, oh, yes, and then fill in the gaps, and then you go from there. And maybe they say like, oh yeah, these meetings are on Thursday afternoon and I have to pick up my kid from daycare on Thursdays and that's the hardest day for me. I don't know.
Right.
Like
Right. Right.
at that point you need to go on and have a human conversation. But I
Right, about
think,
strategies and, all
yeah,
kinds of things to change it
yeah,
or help them or whatever. So,
yeah.
okay. Huh. All right,
So,
great.
I mean, and I think it's really, practicing is important. Thinking through that, you need to find what works well for you. I think something that's worked well for me is to try and map out the start of a conversation. If I have any like really high stakes conversations where I think I'm going to get really frustrated, or, this is like a sticky subject that we have to navigate our way through,
Mhm.
I tend to feel a lot better if I have mapped out the start of the conversation, just so I'm not like, we're, bumbling
Right.
my way through it. Now, you don't want to like you can't map out the entire thing, because again, it's a two-way street there. It's another
Right.
human
Right.
who's going to say words at you.
Mm.
But to me, it helps me feel better prepared if I can at least start us off on the very best foot. And that tends to be it, of like, I want to talk to you about this thing. Here's what I've observed, fact / behavior, right?
Operationalizing the behavior.
Yes. And then like, what's your take
Mhm.
on it, sort of thing.
Mhm. So, wonderful insights and everything that you've gleaned. This has been fantastic. So, how do you apply it? And I know it's just a different angle, different whatever, and practice will help. But okay, you're talking to the general public, whether it's
Mm,
on social media or whether it's, well, let's just take the quote unquote easier one, maybe, of the person who says you don't care about that blue jay, you only care about the bald eagle, and you just euthanize everything, or you just, that kind of thing. So how do you approach that type of conversation? Partly because we know emotions, at least on that side, are running high. They may be running high on my end too, if I'm the one on the other end trying to explain to this person. It's the 10th time in a week that I've had to explain this. Um,
yeah.
so emotions are high. That's the other thing I was thinking about. The preparatory stuff you just mentioned is that if I am thinking this person is lazy coming late to a meeting, I may be getting kind of ticked off about it. And
Yeah.
so I'm going to have some emotions behind it. And that rehearsal beforehand helps a lot with that.
Yes.
But when you're talking to the general public, what does these crucial conversations sort of look like?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, that can be really challenging too, because I mean, with the general public, you don't have an established relationship with
Right.
these people, right? Like if you're applying crucial learning conversations to your partner or your parent or your coworker,
Hmm.
you're already invested in, some sort of relationship to some level. Whereas the public is, there's, they may not necessarily care about how your day goes beyond that.
Right. Right.
Um, I mean, in those situations, I think, again, we get caught up with like trying to share our perspective. And I think that can be important if the person wants to hear it. But nobody wants it shoved down their throats, even though you have all of the best explanations for why we had to euthanize this animal and
Right.
how, this hospital functions. But to me, in those situations, I mean, they're having, what's the source of their emotion? It's coming out at you as like anger of like, you don't care about animals. But at the heart of it all, like they're sad, right? So
Yeah. Some
I,
grief, probably. Yeah.
yeah,
Grief and sad, probably.
it's just
Um,
coming out as anger.
mhm.
And I think in those cases, it's just really important to listen. Now, of course, you always want to don't take any verbal abuse or anything like that. Like there is a
Right.
line, protect yourself
Hmm.
as well. But I really just validate their feelings of like, I can I can see you're very upset, and it's a really sad situation. We hate to see this, great horned owl be euthanized. I love great horned owls.
Right. Right.
I'm happy to share with you our thought process by that if you would like me to talk more about that.
Oh, I like that, because that's like an invitation
Yeah,
that they can say no because they're not ready to hear it.
yeah,
Or, yeah, I would like to hear more about, your thought process behind this. Yeah, I like that approach a lot, because you're helping them. It's not, we're seeing each other on Zoom, but no one's going to see this but me and
I
you.
know.
But, where they're butting heads, right?
Yes,
Like, you're doing this wrong. No, we're not. You're
yeah,
doing this wrong. No, we're not. So you're kind of opposing. And
yeah,
then instead, what you're doing is you're not opposing. You're
right.
validating.
Yes,
You're validating what you think is going on with them, that this is very upsetting. It's very upsetting for us too. And that actually often, I think, diffuses a lot of things, because it's not not something that they can push on,
yeah,
because you're going along with them.
yeah.
Huh. Huh.
And and in some cases they may say, "Oh," and kind of catch themselves and want to hear more. And in some cases
Hmm.
they may say, "No, forget you. You hate animals," and they may stomp off. And it's,
Right.
those
Hmm.
situations are also hard because if you're already coming into a conversation when emotions are already running high, like, that's
Right.
to bring it into a training example, right? Like that's trying to have a meaningful training session with our gyrfalcon who is low in weight and it's a cold morning and he's super hungry and he just cannot even think straight until we get some food
Some
in
food in
him.
his
Like,
belly.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. And yeah, it's so applicable to training, a lot of the things that you're saying too. And we talk training a lot too, but training animals, ambassadors, but it's totally apropos that we need to, okay. And it could be that that person that is, finding out that you euthanized the great horned owl also just lost somebody, lost their pet. They
yeah,
might be hungry. They might be having a raging
yes.
headache. Maybe they're, just getting sick or getting over being sick, or, a myriad of other things that is affecting, how they might be. Here's another ambassador training term. They might be trigger stacked,
Mm,
and this
yeah,
is just the last straw, right?
yeah, exactly.
So, yeah. And having us just, oh, I love that. Just stop yourself and take a breath and just take a moment to appreciate it. And especially if we're in the position where you are, like at the Wildlife Center of Virginia, where you are looked at as the expert. So it's not like you can completely always walk away from things like that, that we have to meet the moment, and help them. I didn't know where else I was going with that. Just meet the moment. How's that? So how do you practice? I mean, it's one thing to know, and probably all of us do know, that we tell ourselves stories, right? And I think everything we do is about stories. But how do you start to practice to realize that you are telling a story? Because I think that's harder than it sounds,
Yeah, it
because
it
they
is.
happen like that, right?
Yes, yes. And you
That
can
person,
really,
Amanda's coming late again. Oh my gosh, she's lazy. That happens in a nanosecond.
yeah,
So
yeah.
how do you start?
I mean, to me, I think everybody has to find what works well for them. To me, listening to these webinars and thinking about them a lot have really just helped reinforce it. Now, I think that's probably true of, again, animal training type stuff too. Maybe that's just the type of learner that I am. Like, I
Hmm.
like listening to these things and thinking about them, and then listening to a different
Hmm.
version of
Hmm.
that same subject to
Hmm.
like cram it in there and see if it sticks. So that's what I like to do. And then I'll kind of make some reflections about it in my own life. I think the other big thing, though, that for me has worked well is maybe find a crucial conversations buddy. So find someone who also really likes this stuff and
Hmm.
listens and wants to learn more and talk with them about it. So my friend Lacey, Hello, Lacey, if you're listening to this podcast.
Shout out to Lacey.
Is my Crucial Conversations buddy. And
Mhm.
we talk pretty regularly, almost every day. And we we do this for each other and ourselves, I think, when we're talking about this. I will tell her about a problem that I'm having, a frustration. And in the course of me telling her, I will catch myself. It's almost like I'm editing myself and I'm like circling words in my
Mhm.
brain of like, see what you said there? And I will be like, and then this person said this, and I'm so mad about it, and I don't know what to do about it, and I guess they're just whatever. I'm really telling myself a story here, aren't I? I'm definitely doing, and it's because I am so mad about it. And when I'm
And that,
not mad
mhm.
about it, I'll come back to it and I'll do better. But like, I think in the
Mhm.
moment, realize if you're in a situation where you're really frustrated or mad, that's okay. Like, don't go into don't have a crucial conversation at that point, but
Right,
have a
right.
friend that you can vent and be like, I'm going to say some terrible things right now, and I'm not using I do this with Lacey all the time. I'm like, I am not using my crucial conversation skills right now. And then I like, bleh. And then I
Uh-huh.
come back to it and I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, now that I vomited that up, I can circle back and try and apply the skills.
Okay.
So that's me kind of talking through it and thinking through it. I think
Mhm.
talking really helps me process. And then I think once you get into it, again, probably like any sort of
Mhm.
trained behavior, you're like, okay, this starts to feel more familiar. I think I'm telling a story right now. Maybe I could do this better.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's what works for me.
Well, and I like that you said you acknowledge that you also get frustrated and mad, because I don't think you are at all saying that if we are, whether we're a supervisor or not a supervisor, and we're going into a crucial conversation, that we can never be angry and we can
Oh,
never be
yeah.
frustrated. So you have to own the fact that you've got that, but not go into a crucial conversation with quote unquote that emotional mindset that is likely to the antecedent is likely to set you up for almost anything that they say. You're going to filter in a way that is not beneficial
Right.
to the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I, I'm thinking about some of these skills in my own personal life. My husband, we've been married for 25 years. You think that we would have like all these conversations down? Oh my goodness, no.
That's actually, so I talked to my husband about this too. I mean, I think doing crucial learning stuff has made our marriage better, has made our communication
Mhm.
better. I think of that, like state my path a lot with him. I think we've both gotten really good at saying, I'm feeling like this, I'm feeling some kind of way about that. And I'm worried about this, of like just
Mhm.
being really honest and open and clarifying, like, I'm not saying this.
Mhm.
And it's
Yeah,
helped
I
overall.
like that. I'm definitely going to take that back with me and think about that a lot more. I mean, I use a lot of operant conditioning, operant learning things. It's like, well, okay, well, if this is a behavior you don't want, what is the behavior you do want? And then
Mm-hmm.
how can I talk to him about this in a way that's not accusatory, which is more inclusive and all of those kinds of things. And I've gotten better. But as most of us are, I'm an emotional being and I'm really
Yeah.
an emotional being sometimes. So yeah, this has been very, very, very good. Do you have any other like pro tips or things that we haven't touched on yet that you're like, oh man, I really want to talk to people about this?
No pro tips from me because I'm not a pro. But I mean,
I
I think it's
disagree.
really, yeah, I think it's really just keep learning. There's a lot of good resources. So for whatever type of learner you are, if you like listening to videos or attending webinars, or if you like reading more, there's a lot of this in written format for
Mhm.
newsletters. Find a buddy, practice, and really the more you do it, the more habits you'll build.
Mhm.
So it's a skill. It's a hard skill. Maybe it's the hardest skill of all because being a human is hard. Uh,
Yeah. Being an
but yeah,
adult human is really hard.
yes,
Adulting, I'm not
it
so
is.
much into.
It is.
It really is.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I I've been enjoying so much this is our third season with the podcast, which just blows me away. But, talking about some of those subjects that as rehabilitators, we might not necessarily gravitate to, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to gravitate to how do you bandage that wing and how do you give fluids and what kind of formula are you using or how to build a cage, and not necessarily really digging down into like the ethics or we're going to be talking in a future episode about One Health and what that is and all. But this is one of those that I think is very important, also very interesting. And I'm glad I get to write the show notes because I'm going to have first crack at a lot of these resources.
Well, good.
Because I'm definitely going to look them up. And I am a learner similar to you, I think, where I like to listen or participate, whatever the class is, or if it's a webinar or something like that. And then I will find another one that might be similar. Maybe it's by somebody else or something, and then listen again. Because when you are ready mentally and in the place where that nugget then all of a sudden now sinks in more, where you may have kind of heard it and you're trying to hear everything and you can't learn everything all at once. So
exactly.
So yeah, I'm a similar learner. So anyway.
And there are, speaking of those resources, we've mentioned it 100 times. Cruciallearning.com is my main preference. Situational leadership is another good resource, which is situational.com. With the Crucial Learning, they put out a lot of free content. So, and I know that can be important to all of us in the rehabilitation field. They have paid content too. They do in-person trainings. They have on-demand trainings, but they have so many free webinars. It's ridiculous. I have, through the Wildlife Center, some of us a few years ago, some of us managers sat down and did an on-demand course together, which was great. But most of my stuff that I've learned from them has been through the newsletters or the free webinars, and they're really great. I see it come through my inbox and it's like, this webinar is, I'm like, sign me up. I don't even care what it's on. So
I know it'll be valuable.
Sign up because they, and I never attend them live because I'm always too busy, but they will record them and then send them out in the newsletter. So I just have this stack of recordings in my inbox. And then because I'm a dork, I listen to them. This is what I do in my free time. I listen to them like on the weekends if I'm like doing my food prep on Sundays for the week, or this weekend I was like, it's time for the scrubbing of my kitchen floor. So I was scrubbing the kitchen floor and listening to, Crucial Learning webinars.
Well, and that's how, I envision the podcast too. And I was going to ask you, that people can, clean cages and listen to the podcast at the same time. Do they have a podcast?
They don't. They really should.
We should tell them that. We should send them the link to this and say, see, you can do this in a podcast format too. But yeah, I like that idea. And because we are so busy, but sometimes we can take a task that is kind of, you don't want to say mindless, but something that takes a lot less brain power maybe. And I do it all the time too, trying to figure out how I can do it. Or if I'm doing something on the computer, I've got two computers, my work computer and my home computer, and I can have the home computer running the webinar while I'm like trying to, populate a Excel spreadsheet or something that I don't need to really think about, but I need to do. So anyway, oh my gosh, Amanda, this was amazing.
Well, good.
It's fun. It is fun. It was very reinforcing. They're throwing out another ambassador animal term. Very, very, very reinforcing for me. And I really appreciate your time talking about this really important topic that we can use in all facets of our lives, but in particular, because we're about wildlife rehabilitation on the podcast, that, it will help us in our wildlife rehabilitation. So
yeah, I hope people found it useful. I think it's fascinating. Humans are weird and it's hard being one, and everyone's doing a great job. So
We're going to use that as the tagline for
yes, yes,
We're
please do.
weird. Everybody's doing a good job, and it's hard.
We're trying our best
We're
to
trying our best
to do
and,
this.
Yeah, and it is why I love this community so much, because we are always striving to be better. That was a conversation I had with Amanda Nicholson, Senior Vice President of the Wildlife Center of Virginia. The next 2 episodes, wildlife veterinarian Dr. Miranda Torkelson joins me to talk in depth about the rehabilitation and medical management of red fox. We had a fascinating conversation. Dr. Miranda brings so much passion and expertise to the topic of wildlife rehabilitation and fox, so please join us. Wildlife Rehabilitation from Rescue to Release is a production of Partners for Wildlife, working hand in hand with wildlife rehabilitators and veterinarians to improve the welfare of orphaned, ill, and injured wildlife. Our executive producer is me, Gail Buell. I'm the Partnership Coordinator for Partners for Wildlife at the University of Minnesota College of Veterinary Medicine's Raptor Center. To learn more about the Raptor Center and Partners for Wildlife, visit raptor.umn.edu. Our producer is Kurt Clockey. Special thanks to our guest Amanda Nicholson, Partners for Wildlife, and the Raptor Center at the University of Minnesota College of Veterinary Medicine. And that's our show. Hope you'll join us again next time.